Good to see you, Ray. I'm doing well, thanks. Ready for Christmas. Mental.
Good afternoon. It is 12:03, so I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. I think everyone who is going to be here either in person or online is with us. Online, who do we have? We have Senator Ford. Senator Ford, Senator Mervan, Mr. McCrindle, and Judge Kenworthy. Okay, welcome to all four of you. And I don't think we have anyone from the public signed in to testify. Do we have a sheet for folks to sign in? Okay, if there's anyone here who wants to testify, let my legislative assistant know. Raise your hand, Matt. Yep. So we'll get you signed in. We have a number of items on the agenda today, and I want to thank everybody for taking time to be here for this third and final meeting. We've covered a lot of ground in the last two meetings, and we're going to get into a number of additional topics today. So again, welcome. We'll go around and do introductions real quick. If you just want to say who you are and whom you're representing. I already mentioned the four folks who are online. Mr. Moore, why don't we start with you?
Hi, I'm Ray Feller, Director of
Terry Stigdon, Director of the Department of Child Services.
Ed Clear, House District 72, Chairman of the committee.
Joan Smith, Indiana Department of Education.
All right. Well, thanks again, everybody, for being here. We have the minutes from the last meeting. I know they were just handed out, so I'm going to pause for a minute and give everyone time to review them. Matt, did you email those to the folks who are online? Okay. So Senator Ford and Senator Mervan and Mr. McCrindle and Judge Kenworthy, you should have the minutes in your email if you haven't caught them yet. All right, any comments or questions regarding the minutes?
I have one correction on attendance.
Sure.
Michael Moore was here in person,
Ah, good catch. He was in fact here.
even presented.
Yes. So Matt, did you get that? Mr. Moore was here for the attendance on the minutes. And you might want to clarify, it says Representative Clear welcomed all to the virtual meeting, that I welcomed everyone to the meeting, including those who were participating virtually. Any other comments, questions, or changes, corrections? All right, with those two clarifications, would someone like to make a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
So moved by Director Stigdon. Second by Mr. Moore. All in favor?
Aye.
Assume no one is opposed. The minutes are approved. We're going to start with Youth Advisory Board update. So who do we have to provide the Youth Advisory Board update? Might pull your microphone up a little bit there. Did you say Megan Tribble?
Megan Tribble, yes, TRIBLE. And so I help administer the Indiana Youth Advisory Board.
Mhm.
And so today we had scheduled 2 youth to come and talk to you all. However, some unforeseen circumstances happened, and so they were unable to attend today. So I am attending in their place, and I have a written statement from one of our youth that we're going to speak today. Stephanie Knight, who is also a member of the Children's Commission. So I'm going to read her statement and then answer any questions that you guys may have about the Indiana Youth Advisory Board. I started this journey in October of 2020. I didn't know much about the Indiana Youth Advisory Board or anything to do with it. I went to my first IAB meeting back in October of 2020, and I absolutely fell in love with it. To be honest, though, I didn't go into that first meeting with the right intentions. I had a lot of anger towards the system and didn't know how to process or cope with that anger. I was 21 and recently aged out of foster care months prior. I was starting my first semester of college and dealing with a lot of grief. IAB gave me a purpose and gave me the support I needed to get through. I learned a lot about the underlying pieces of child welfare that they don't always tell you when you're in care. In short, I learned the why to many of my unanswered questions. I also learned how to advocate on many levels. I built my confidence and my self-worth. I felt like my purpose of improving the system for others was being fulfilled, and I wanted more opportunities. I wanted to be the voice for many youth who didn't have one. This past summer, I applied to 4 different advocacy positions. I applied to be a peer mentor for the Catalyst program. I applied to be a foster club all-star. I also applied to become the Jim Casey Young Fellow. All 3 of these positions I was not chosen for because I was lacking good interview skills. I was intimidated and I struggled with saying and telling everyone the good things I had to offer. But that didn't stop me from not trying because I knew I had it in me. Everyone kept telling me there was a bigger and better opportunity coming and that I just had to be patient. I remember when I got that first email about the Children's Commission. I wasn't so sure about applying, but as I kept on getting more emails from previous caseworkers and IO specialists, I decided to do my own homework and look more into it. While watching one of the online videos of a commission meeting, I will admit I was very intimidated. I thought to myself, these people have the power to affect a large amount of change. I'm not ready for something like this. But that didn't stop me from applying. I didn't have anything to lose. I applied and waited for an email back. I set up the interview and was super nervous, but I kept telling myself that I had it and that I was prepared. I had practiced, gotten feedback from my peers, and researched all aspects of the commission. I have never left an interview feeling more proud and accomplished. I felt like I made a great impression, which in turn I did. When I got the call a few weeks later that I was appointed, my heart skipped a beat. I was so shocked. I didn't know what to think or feel. I wasn't even doing this advocacy work for a year, and I was appointed onto the commission. IAB helped lead me to the commission, but I feel as if the commission is going to lead me so much farther. In the past year and a half, I've grown into a strong young woman. I have learned that I have what it takes to create and impact change. I have built my foundation and built my confidence. I'm doing what I always wanted to do. I am being listened to, something I wouldn't have thought was possible years prior. If DCS didn't feel as if youth voice was important, then I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now. If the director of DCS didn't fight for our voices to be heard, then we wouldn't have the opportunities we have now. Having youth voices tied into DCS has created long, impactful change, and I only see that growing. We are able to understand the system better and help create better futures for the youth that come after us. Being a part of the Indiana Youth Advisory Board gave me purpose and confidence. It led me to being appointed as a member of the commission, and I see the commission opening more opportunities for me. I hope that all youth are able to see within themselves what I grew to see in myself. That is the power of youth voice. I encourage all stakeholders, policymakers, agency directors, judges, and attorneys, and all others who have the power to make change in Indiana to include youth voices when making these changes. Using their voices not only helps them, but it will help you and the systems you are trying to change. Youth have ideas that are innovative, relatable, and address the current issues we are all facing today. That unsolved problem, the unanswered questions, that answer could be in a youth just waiting for your call to action. Help show everyone that I am not unique, special, or one of a kind. Show the state that we value youth voices in all systems, and make me one of many youth who have a seat at the table and who can make a difference in the lives of others in the state of Indiana. Thank you for your time and for listening. Stephanie Knight.
Thank you for reading that. I'm sorry Stephanie couldn't be with us in person. Hopefully we can get her back at or get her here in person at a future meeting. But we certainly appreciate what she shared in her statement. Are there any comments or questions? Or Ms. Tribble, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I don't at this time. I know Stephanie really wanted to be here, and I hope that she does have another opportunity to come.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
think that her biggest message is just, with the support of leaders at DCS to be able to integrate youth voice into that system. She'd love to see that in all systems, and having youth voice in all systems to help create change.
And tell us about your role again.
I facilitate the Indiana Youth Advisory Board.
The board. Okay. Very good. All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Megan.
And then we had invited a birth parent to provide an update. Is that? Welcome. Come on up. Pardon?
Do I need the microphone?
Yes, if you'll speak in the microphone. This is being broadcast online, so we want to make sure that folks who are joining us online can hear as well. But if you'll introduce yourself and then feel free to share.
My name is Mandy Hummer. I'm with the Indiana Birth Parent Advisory Board. Me and my husband have been a part of that for a few months now. And they asked me to come and share just our experience with being parents who've had children in the welfare system. So our story started in 2017. My youngest son was taken from the hospital, and my oldest son was taken into foster care. And this was a result of addiction. And since then, we have conquered that through being saved through Jesus Christ. And we found a great church home. We have this great program. I've given some literature to your audience if you have information, but it's Performers Unanimous out of Muncie, Indiana. It's a program that we've been through for the last 4 years. We're dedicated to it. We get the information out whenever we can. The most important aspect of that is that we do recover, and we recover with support. But I know you want to hear about our experience with DCS, which started, it was pretty complicated. For the first 6 months we were in the system, me and my husband were thwarted at all angles at trying to be in recovery in these systems. We had lists of things over and over that we had to do that we were unable to get accomplished just because of where we were in our lives. We didn't have vehicles. We weren't maintaining any kind of relationships with family members. We had no support system, those sorts of things that you run into when you're an addict. When DCS got involved, they made these mandates to us, like you have to get this checklist done or else, basically, but there was no emotion behind it. There were really no consequences, I guess. I hate to say that because obviously the consequence was not getting our children back as quickly, but they weren't as concerned as they would have been if we were doing things and then failing and then doing things and failing. At that point, we were only failing. And so they just sort of minimized it and just said, you have to get the ball rolling. We went to court several times, and it was basically, there was no push to help us, that we were stagnating in the system for 6 months. My husband, we were in a car accident that should have been fatal. That's how we found the Lord. And in that process, we found a church, like I said, At that time, through DCS, we had established my parents as a resource family for both of our children. Up to that point, it was kind of hit and miss about our visits. Because we were failing through the system, it was mostly our fault. But things had happened that my parents didn't want to obey the rules. We didn't obey the rules necessarily, and no one was being held accountable to these court orders and court mandates and things. Once we did get saved and sober, we started advocating for ourselves through the system. And then it did seem to get a little strange, because you would think this is the sunny side of things. This is where, okay, they're finally doing well, they're doing their visits, they're getting counseling, but no. So it got worse. My parents, they were kind of forced into a role through DCS of being more in charge of my children than I was. They basically, the department said, you guys have control of the children physically, therefore you are in charge of raising them. My parents took that very liberally and didn't want to give me my parental rights, and that hurt. And that was something that we struggled with. We went through many supervisors, we went through many channels to try to correct the overbearing feeling of not only were our kids separated from us physically, but they were being separated from us emotionally as well. And we get the same answer. This is what happens when you get your children taken away. These are consequences of your actions. And when we started doing so well that it was, now we're going to get the kids overnight. Now we're going to be getting, they're coming home. This is, we've gotten it all the way correct now. It got even worse. Then our family case manager started refusing to do our meetings. She started to basically deny our rights through the state. And even though we did have our children taken away, something that we've advocated for since then is that you are still a person, you do still have rights. Nobody can take that away from you since we are Americans. I had some very specific notes that I wanted to explain to you guys, but apparently this is the direction that I thought you needed to hear. There were some hidden agendas with some of the staff, and that's locally. I'm not saying that that's a view of the whole state or anything. Locally, we dealt with some people who, again, once we started to do well, they took it almost as a personal offense when we did advocate for ourselves. They would just not answer phone calls. They would not answer text messages. They would not follow guidelines and directives through the state. And me and my husband were very good about looking up state laws and handbooks and what we were supposed to be getting through, like our services. Like we needed services as well. We needed help. And we just always got the same answer. It's a rough outline of what could be happening. We don't have to follow the guidebook fully. We don't have to fully follow the law. And again, it would be, you had your children taken away. What right do you have to step up and kind of say, like, you're being treated unfairly? And so, after we got the kids back, I realized that a lot of it started as a stigma with who we were as people because of where we came from, income level, all of that, but also being addicts and having your children taken away is you're kind of the monster in the room. And now being part of the Birth Parent Advisory Board, I've got to sit in on lectures with foster parents who say they come into this service saying that is a bad parent, that's a bad person. And I think that's kind of the stigma I want to stop. And I think the people in this room, I think it starts here with the kind of rules and laws that you start making that don't start with a law. It starts with compassion and care and love and self-worth for the people who are going through the system. We didn't have anybody made available to us that we could ask questions to, that we could bring concerns to. We were shut down all across the board. I'm not necessarily college educated, but I do feel like at points we were made to feel that we were completely ignorant to all things. And so I could understand maybe someone without the drive, how they might not look up the state laws, how they might not look up the mandates or what they were afforded being parents with children in the system. So that's a little bit of our kind of circle that we've been through. And now we actually are through the birth parent advisory board because we had someone that called child services over and over again out of revenge. And so we were able to, to finish that out, proving that we were not needing services through this point. But he said that since we have this great experience, we could share it and share the hope that, there are different levels and different places that people come to the department with just different levels of experience.
So how did you come to be on the advisory board?
So my husband's uncle is a raging alcoholic, and at one point last year, we were given custodial guardianship over his grandmother who has dementia, and we helped her get into an assisted living, and his uncle was not happy about that. And so to take revenge, he knew about our background, but he didn't realize how far we had come. So when he started making these wild accusations about things we were doing now, he was using things that he could have made up 5 years ago. And my husband, having been through the system, we had several names and some information of supervisors and directors, and we went to a state level director, and then we were directed to a man named Gil.
Gil Smith.
You know Gil.
Yeah.
And he listened to my husband's complete story. He was the first person who listened and said, okay, this is wrong. Your uncle needs to be reprimanded, number one. But number two, we have a place for you. We have a place for your story. And then I hitched a ride on my husband's coattails. So.
So you're both on the board?
We are.
Yeah. And when were you appointed?
I was at the end of September, and he was
So just a few months ago.
just a few months.
Okay. So what has your experience been so far?
I love the advisory board. I love some of the things that we've been able to watch and see. And like I said, we watched the co-parent interviews and things like that just happened a few weeks ago. My husband got to speak at the Yes engagement, and I was just, blown away with our, and this is in 4 years, I've seen there are people who want to make a change, who don't want it to be the same experience that we had 4 years ago coming into the system. And I'm really impressed with the viewpoint of needing a mentorship program, because that's where my passion lies. And now coming alongside of people and saying, hey, I know this is new and I know this is frustrating and scary, but we'll get through it. And you at least have one person who loves you enough to help you get through it. Honestly,
It's okay.
You said you had some additional things written down.
it's just, I was trying to keep my 5 minutes. It's really, I think I said mostly everything.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate you sharing your story. Can you tell us a little bit about your recovery experience, how that started, and how that, where you are in that journey?
Yeah, so because we were both saved out of addiction through the car accidents, I was in active addiction for 17 years. My husband made a little bit longer. When he wrecked our vehicle, we're doing about 70 miles an hour on back roads, and we flipped the car twice. I knew that God saved me in that moment. I was not raised a Christian. I was actually raised the opposite of that. And so I didn't know how exactly to take God's plan after that, but we'd already been, our kids were taken, we were living in a motel room, and now here he was drinking and driving and almost killed me. And I just didn't realize, like, God has a plan for all of us. And we went along with it, and we met these people who explained, like, this is what happened. And I gave my life to God, and I accepted that Jesus Christ is my Savior. And through that, we go to, it's Grace Baptist Church in Muncie. They have the program Reformers Unanimous. It meets on Friday nights. It's a international recovery discipleship program. And through that, you learn what is causing your underlying issues. And of course, we all have that. We all have those issues. It's not just drugs and alcohol. There are things, we don't have to talk about it, but through that, you learn as a person to give those things up one at a time for others' sake. And, growing up an addict, like, I didn't know how to not be selfish. And I didn't realize what kind of person it was going to change me into. And that's kind of where we are in our recovery now. We are recovered. I don't call myself an addict. I don't have to stand up and take a token when I sin. I just say, God, please forgive me. And I just go about my business. I don't use drugs anymore. My food is my sin of choice now. But, I can go in front of my church family and I can say, God's grace is sufficient today. I have a great support system. We actually got our program, I was talking to the ombudsman, we had our program identified in the DCS court after it had taken so long to get us into a recovery program. We got this one identified as one that counts as rehabilitation because we had tried Meridian Services and they don't do that as a couple. And we used as a couple, constantly. I don't know how one of us was going to get clean for 6 months. And then, it was completely unreasonable, but God worked it out. And now we use our sobriety, which is 4 years, to help other people. We're leaders in the program. We do lots of ministry work. We use these experiences to our advantage, not to our deficit. So that's where we're at and growing every day. This is a new experience for me. So
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. I would always encourage us to use person-centered language. So rather than talking about being an addict, or I think you used the term raging alcoholic to describe your husband's uncle, I think it's important to talk about people suffering from substance use disorder, recognizing that those are diseases.
I understand that is a concept that some people adhere to. I think a sin nature causes all sorts of temperaments in people, and this man is he uses drugs and alcohol on a daily basis, and he turns into a different person, and he has wet brain syndrome, and so he is raging. And when I say that, I meant that to the fullest extent. It wasn't necessarily a dig.
Well, it's still a disease, so we need to use person-centered language. Does anyone have any questions for Ms. Hummer? Please.
So thank you so much for speaking. And I just want to share that having the birth parent advisory board has been a labor of love for me. Coming from the healthcare setting, it was just everyday operations to make sure that we had the voice of the people that we served. And so I'm grateful to the parents that we have that have been willing to give up their time, because you have to give up your time to meet. But in order to have transformation, we have to do things differently. We can't change the system using the same thinking that we use to get us in the place that we, are in. So I appreciate you sharing that, because I think it's important for every organization, agency, industry to hear what's working, what's not working, and what we can do as a system to make it harder to make it harder for us to make it difficult for those that we serve. Does that make sense? So I just appreciate your transparency and thank you from driving from Muncie
No,
down here on this beautiful blustery day to speak to us.
This has been a privilege for me as well, and it is my passion that people hear. The transparency is something that I've been very open about, our recovery as well as, our past, because that's how, like you said, how we change the thinking of things. I know that a lot of people thought we were bad people and just make bad choices for a long time, but you can make good choices.
And something I said last week or maybe the week before when I was being interviewed for something, I said, if you really love the children, you have to learn how to love the parents. And that's, I think, a difficult concept for many people, but one that we really need to examine in all of us, that helping the family together, you don't just help the child and think less of the parents. So this gives us a great opportunity, not just us as an agency, but all state agencies, to not see the people that we serve as bad people, but to help them in the best way that we can.
Yes, I appreciate that. That was kind of my closing statement that I was going to end with. I think that the common goal is, to get everyone back together as a family. And a lot of the problem that I found is that you don't see them as a family when you separate them. And I think you have to love people right where they're at, but also see that their potential is that they will be a family again. Don't start it out like, oh, these people, they're never going to get sober. They're not going to be able to maintain a parental atmosphere for these kids. Even, the broad range of things that could be happening can be healed. Like I said, with love and compassion and a team of people. I needed there's about 200 people in our church, I think, and I needed them all to really be loved and to fully come into being this person today. And so I think that you guys have more people than that. And I think that all of your people can step up and be leaders in that aspect as well.
Thank you.
You have a lot more people than that.
We do.
Mr. Hummer, why don't you come up and introduce yourself, please? Yeah,
say
stay
that.
here, please. Just say hi.
Hi, my name is Jared Hummer. Nice to meet you.
Well, good to have both of you here. Thanks for making the drive down from Muncie. And does anyone else have any? Mr. Moore, you have a comment or question?
Inside of the state recovery. And also what areas are work well in child welfare. I know it's a loaded question. High level.
Do you want to answer? Do you want my answer? Yeah. Okay, so first I will answer, and then I'll let him answer because actually he probably has a better one. Some things that I thought did work well was there were some outside resources that were brought in to help us with transportation. These people had more compassion towards what we were trying to do. And even though we were failing drug tests over and over again, she would take us to our visitation and she wouldn't say like, oh, you need to do better, oh, any of this. She would just talk to us like people. That basically, like I was saying, the ability was there, that the prognosis was there for the end result, and that's kind of what worked well for her. And she ended up, she's kind of a friend now that still stays in our life. She was actually at our wedding. So systems in place that DCS reaches out into the community to get. Those are the things that do work well because there are people who want that connection to our community. On a higher level, the things that do not work is the red tape, the disconnect from people coming straight into the system. Like I said, my son was taken straight from the hospital, and I didn't know where he was. There are some laws in place that say that a newborn is supposed to be with her so many days afterwards, and we far surpassed whatever that number was. I think it's 6 days, and it might have been in asking like, why is the law not being followed? Like, why are we being turned down for something that is for the betterment of my child? We were just told that there was no people, there was no services, there was no one to facilitate. And that was just the bottom line. That was the answer. The red tape was the answer. Not like, I'm sorry that we're not serving you. I'm sorry that we're not fulfilling our end of what we've set out to do here. So the red tape is necessary, and I know structurally
isn't.
that there has to be rules and
It
laws,
isn't.
but
I hate red tape.
I feel that this is the place to start, and where you can say, if we're gonna set these rules, there has to be consequences for the facility setting the rules as well as the person that you're trying to facilitate. That's the best way I can answer that.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak here. One of the biggest issues that we had was like my wife was talking about, they asked you to do these services, drug services, and in our community, there's two. There's actually only one. Is that Cornerstone in Randolph County?
Centerstone.
Well, there's only two, and the easiest one for us to get to, closest to us, was Marine Services, but both of them were backed up. They were talking 3 to 6 months, and then when we got it, it would be a 6-week program for me, or, you know, and then, and she had talked about, we didn't have people coming beside us. Now, at the time, I think the law was 17 cases per child welfare worker or case worker.
Oh, yes. Mhm.
Ours had 42.
And she was over and about, so she had no time.
And that's no fault of the workers. And that's, that shows a problem, you know, in general that we have. But because of these things, DCS can't come beside you like I'm sure they would like to. So then it becomes not a hope so much for the parents, but can you achieve these goals to get your kid back? Well, but then I think we see a lot of people returning, you know, because they didn't adequately get the help. They might have met the goals, you know, but did they really receive the help that they needed? So, and then of course, really it's time sensitive, you know, when you're waiting 6 months to get into a place, that's 6 months that your kids don't have. That's 6 months that you don't have that relationship. And when you're talking, you know, if you just have a newborn, and by the time you get in, that baby's 6 months old, that's a big time difference. So we were able to find this RU program, but through that, there's also so many different resources in the community. We live in Delaware County, and there's really no reason in Delaware County for you not to have basic necessities. There's so many places there for shelter. It might not be ideal, but you can get shelter, you can get food, you can get clothing, and there's so many different resources. And I see new things popping up all the time. The community seems to be working together, smaller groups do certain things, and then they work together. As a larger group, it's really awesome. But what I would like to see is a volunteer group with people that have been in the system, people that are recovered from drugs and alcohol, that are familiar with these systems. And when you're in DCS, you're usually involved with more than one system, the legal system, you know, poverty, a lot of these things all cross paths. But if DCS, you know, could have a group of volunteers that they could call on, say, hey, we have this couple that would be interested in speaking with you, and it could be sort of like a mentorship. So to fill the gap in between the services that DCS cannot provide, you know, somebody there just to encourage, motivate, even when these people know about the resources that are available, which often they don't. Once they know, they don't have the motivation to go take care of these things. You know, like to get their house paid for. They say a lot of times, well, it's a lot of paperwork. It's a lot of paperwork, but you're also getting counseling. You know, if you think about it in terms of what you get for the amount that you put in, you're actually making more than you put in. So, anyways, that's what I would like to see is if we could get some volunteers and the DCS could call upon and people were willing to work with them that would help guide them through the system and show them the resources out there. And also just, you know, to love.
Is it your specialist?
Yes.
I will move on to special education. Criminal cases, just for that. It's through your specialist model, being able to advocate.
Yeah, and I believe it would help the state, it would be free to the state, you know. I believe it would help people say, Alex, you know, what support you have, and these people might form lifelong bonds, you know, so they can be support after the system too.
You mentioned two providers, Centerstone and Meridian. So those were outpatient treatment providers. And so you were on a waiting list with both of those to receive services. And you said it was going to be up to 6 months to receive services. But then where did you turn to? You didn't go to either of them. You went somewhere else?
No, what happened, we went to the RU program, and when we came back.
What does RU stand for? I'm sorry.
It's Reformers Unanimous.
Okay.
And so we went through, well, we're still going through that program because it's a really detailed program. But we had passed, I don't know how many drug screens, we get close to 50 drug screens at this point. And when we went for it, our case manager said that we haven't taken classes. And I told her the reason why, and I had been contacted my case manager several times. And she was not able to get us in, you know, but so the judge said, you know, I can't ask them to go through a program that they can't get into and that you can't help them get into. And it seems, and we had brought leaders from the RU program and explain the program, they talk about it, they give a testimony of how we're doing it, progressing, and showed some work that we were doing. So the judge said, you know, saying this program, I will consider already. So that's how we got it.
So the RU program ended up being your recovery program, which you're still in.
Yes.
Okay. And that was offered through your church?
Yes.
It's an international.
Yeah, it's all over. They've got it here in Indiana. I'm not sure which church is.
Is that a program you're familiar with, Director Stigman?
It's the first time I've heard about it.
Yeah. But it sounds like the judge was willing to accept your participation in that as an alternative to the other two programs that were recognized in your community. Excuse me.
Yeah, this is, testified for the program. We also had around 50 drug screens at that point.
Awesome.
A lot of
Excuse me. And I'm very glad that the two of you found success in that program. But I think one important point is there's a lack of treatment programs. And I'm sure there were and are other folks in your community who have not been able to get into a program that is appropriate for their needs. And that has served as a barrier to reunification.
One thing, there is not just our church, but there's many churches. There's several recovery groups in there, and they're talking about numerous recovery groups, and not all of them are faith-based. But there are numerous recovery programs that in our community, we probably in most communities, and if we have this volunteer system, people that are familiar with that, they can help lead people to these places where, you know, DCS may not know about, they may not know to lead people that way. So I think there'll be another resources that not.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments from the committee members? I know we have several folks online. Senator, I can't see them. There's no screen. So I'm just speaking into the air, but Senator Ford or Senator Mervan, or if Judge Kenworthy is still with us, I know she was only going to be able to be with us for a limited period of time. And Mr. McCrindle, if any of you have questions, please feel free to chime in.
This is Judge Kenworthy. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, very well.
I just want to say that this lack of service providers is a real problem across the board. We heard from residential facilities recently, and we're hearing the very same thing when it comes to outpatient services for families. Supervised visitation, treatment programming, home-based case management, in-home services, which are so very frequently needed, are in short supply these days. And so all of those shortages cause delays in cases. And we have kids who aren't seeing parents as they should because we can't find appropriate supervision for visitations. I will say that the department and CASA and parents have been doing a very good job of thinking outside the box and finding some other alternatives to services. But I really do think that this is a problem that doesn't seem to be improving without some attention at the state level. So I want to thank these folks for their comments today, and just wanted to weigh in and affirm what they've been saying about the shortage of service.
Thank you, Judge Kenworthy.
Thank you as well. And I actually heard you speak at the Yes Summit and loved it very much. So thank you guys both for being here. But I also think the other piece was not just that there was a shortage, but that the way in which you needed treatment to be offered wasn't available. I think that's a really key piece that is missing. And so I appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah. Any other comments or questions? How are your kids doing? Yeah.
My children are thriving. They go to a private Christian school at our church. We were very blessed with that situation as well with the school choice award.
Mhm.
My son, he's in first grade. So I just started the K4.
Well, I'm sure everybody is ready for Christmas, right? All right. Well, thank you again for making the trip here and sharing your story. It's very informative and I think good for the committee and others who are listening to hear what you had to say. So thank you. Next on the agenda is DCS Ombudsman Report. And here comes the DCS Ombudsman Report.
Thank you for both of those presentations. They're so fantastic to follow. I am Shoshana Everhart, and I am the Director of the Ombudsman Bureau for the Department of Child Services. I want to thank you, Representative Claire, for asking me to give a brief summary today of the work that we've completed in 2020, and a little bit about what we've been working on in 2021. I want to begin by telling you just a little bit about our Bureau, although I'm sure most of you are familiar with our work. I was appointed to the role of director in September of 2020 during the pandemic and began working from home. I did take a few weeks to get acclimated to the work in relative isolation, but we all did the very best we could to complete our work and hold it to a high standard of performance. My training is in social work, and I've been in the profession for a little bit over 40 years. And I also was a Department of Child Services employee in the 80s and 90s. So that's a little bit what I bring to the position. Our agency is governed by the statute in the Indiana Code, which is 4-13-19. You're probably familiar with that, but it guides our work, provides an outline for our responsibilities. So we came into existence in 2009 and became operational in 2010. So just about 10 years, 10, 11 years. Now we have 3 full-time ombudsmen on our staff, and we are housed at the Department of Administration. So we do appreciate the space and the assistance that IDOA provides our agency. So in Indiana, the Department of Child Services Ombudsman is not a part of DCS, but rather we're a separate agency. And that allows us to have autonomy and to be seen as impartial in carrying out our duties. Our annual reports are all available on our website at in.gov, but I wanted to give you a few highlights of the 2020 report today, because I think the last report that your committee heard was regarding the 2019. So since 2019, the Bureau has focused our work in a few areas. In 2019 and 20, we were able to add another assistant ombudsman to the staff. And that person happens to be a very experienced ombudsman that has added expertise to our staff. So we're thankful for that. We also implemented a new case management system during the pandemic, which allows us to have a more organized method of documenting our work and collecting the data that we need. Another event was planning for creating records retention, which prior to that, we did not have a way to archive our cases. So we're in the process of doing that. We used to have paper file documentation, and this new system allows for confidential retention of our records. So we've been busy scanning 10 years worth of files in order to get this project completed. We're almost there. We've also been continuing to provide services to constituents by working from home, which of course was a challenge in 2020 for every state agency. And we returned to the office in July. Alfreda Smith, who had been the previous ombudsman, retired from her role as the director in August. And then I was appointed and began work in September of 2020. In 2020 and throughout this year, we have held regular quarterly meetings with the DCS Bureau, Detective, I think she is a detective, Director Stigdon, and the Field Operations Director, as well as the Assistant Directors. I found these to be very useful to establish relationships, to discuss specific cases when needed, and learn of the new developments in DCS regarding their own training and policy. Staff that participate in these exchanges have been responsive, open, and very respectful. The meetings are conducted with a spirit of cooperation and continued improvement that I think will benefit all of our clients and our families. Lastly, in general, I just wanted to officially sort of commend DCS for being able to provide services to the best of their ability during the pandemic. We all had serious concerns about all of our families during the global health crisis. But I think that DCS managed to be as creative as possible to maintain those services. Okay, I wanted to talk a little bit about the information in the 2020 annual report. As I said, all of our reports are located on our website, which is at in.gov. But I wanted to go through a little bit about our process in order for you to understand the categories in which I'm going to talk about our statistics. So our responsibility is to respond to complaints from the public regarding action or omission by the Department of Child Services. We are not able to advocate for a specific family, but rather we are an advocate for policy, rule, and regulation. And we want those to best serve Indiana's children. So we do this by providing problem resolution and independent, unbiased case reviews. So we can respond 3 different ways when we receive an inquiry from the public. Number 1 is information referral. And through this method, we're able to provide education about DCS policies, about procedures, and to maybe give information about how to connect the client calling or the constituent that's calling to staff members that can address their concerns. So the second level of intervention is called an assist, which is where we would make the connection with their permission. And we connect them to the Department of Child Services staff member. And so we're sort of the go-between so that they can kind of hopefully work out their problems. And that usually is very successful. those assists seem to work out very well. And then the third area is a formal complaint, which is filed in writing by the constituent, and we can complete an entire review of the case and the allegations that the family is making or the public, member of the public. So this can turn into what's called an investigation, which simply means that there are numerous issues involved, and we may need to interview collateral contacts. So those don't happen that often, but we are able to do that with our statute. So in 2020, the information and referral that I mentioned, those numbers were 1,198, and that was up 249 from 2019. The assists came in at 141 assists for the year. And as I said, those are usually the most helpful in establishing communication. So if those efforts don't solve the problem, then we open an actual file of a formal complaint. And we opened 131 of those cases in 2020. So all of these are now easily tracked in our new case management system. And we have 4 major areas of concern that came up in 2020. Those involve case plans, placement of the child, child safety, and removals. And those seem to sort of hold true from previous years, from what I could research.
Would you list those again, please?
It's case plan, placement, child safety, and removals. Each, each completed complaint is then given, after it's investigated, a validity standard of either full merit, partial merit, which means that there's some things that we found that had merit and some that did not, or totally a non-meritorious complaint. So at that point, we report back to the Department of Child Services our findings, as well as we do to the person that made the complaint, if they are a parent, guardian, or custodian. We do receive complaints from the public, and there's only a certain amount of information we can get that. So when we report back to them, we ask them to provide a response to that within 60 days of receiving our investigative findings. So during that response, we want them to address how this will be rectified in the future. And it could include training or policy change. There are a variety of responses that the department has had to our requests. So in 2020, 4% of those cases had full merit findings. 25% of those had both merit and non-merit findings in the same case. And 71% were non-merit findings. And overall, we seem to fit sort of into the national averages regarding complaint validity in that area. Typically, what I understand is usually there's about 75% that are unfounded, about 25 that are founded. So we're at about that 29 and 75. I will be completing the 2021 report in January, and we'll be filing that with the governor's office. In general, for this year, the trends are similar. We've had a lot of concerns voiced about kinship care, child safety removals, and also visitation, which I think probably follows the folks that presented before me, because there have been some difficulty with visitations. Okay, so I wanted to mention I'm an active member of the United States Ombudsman Association, and Indiana has been mentioned recently in positive ways by the association. So I wanted to tell you about those. In one instance, the state was praised for the structure and organization of our bureau as an independent agency apart from DCS, because not all states have that available. And some of our agency's procedures have been a prototype for other states, as I understand. And most recently, we were mentioned in a public report by the Alaska Ombudsman Bureau as an example of excellent service standards that were created by our DCS agency. So those are fantastic to have because it, excuse me, it led to a pretty serious issue in the Alaska case. So overall, I'm very proud to be part of the work on improving policies and procedures for Indiana children's families. Our Bureau's relationship with DCS is of mutual benefit, I believe, and Indiana is trying to continually strive to do better on behalf of our children and families. So thank you for your commitment on this goal yourself. And questions? I'll try.
Questions? Mr. Moore?
The line here, 2019, 2020, just to compare. I don't know, but just like when you, non-merit or hybrid, you find the referral source, different things from the parent or
Oh, yes.
worker. You have some, one of the concern is the number of non-merit cases in Clark County are exactly the same number of parents. Both of them, one that's all maybe one parent.
I don't have it with me, but can I get back with you?
Yeah,
Because I don't know.
okay.
I don't know if it's an error.
Yes, exactly the same number, kind of similar to the three.
Okay, thank you for pointing that out. I'll take a look at it.
And then, who resolves? Who decides on there?
Well, yes, the ombudsman assigned to the case does the full investigation. And then they bring the case to me and together we decide whether it's meritorious or not.
Is it involving purview that?
Usually, not necessarily staff unless it becomes an investigation. At that point, we may interview staff, and that doesn't happen very often. We only had one full investigation in 2020. But when we initially received the complaint, we informed DCS of the concerns and we asked for their response. So usually we send out a very long email that says, here are the concerns. Could you please respond with either what you did or didn't do in regard to this piece of the complaint? Because typically there are several items, as you can imagine. So then the caller or the person making the complaint is typically interviewed on the phone when they call in, or like after we are able to look at the case, we may follow up with them by telephone to just say we don't understand what you meant by this. That is how
So it's mostly desk.
it is a desk review. We have full access to DCS files. And so it is very much a sit down and read and study because it's a review of the documents in the file. Because it's impossible for us to do what gets difficult is a he said, she said situation. So we have to go by what's documented in the DCS file, and we also have access to court reports.
Other questions? Anyone joining us virtually have a question? I have a question. If I understand the process correctly, anyone who wants to file a complaint with your office has to first file the complaint with the local DCS office, right?
What we ask, yes, what we ask is that they may have already done that.
Mhm.
Sometimes they have and sometimes they have not. So if they have never spoken with anyone at DCS management, we do require that first. So we usually at that point, we provide the contact. And so we say, may we contact DCS and have them call you? Because sometimes it's very hard for them to get an answer back, to tell you the truth. So if we make that connection, it seems to work better. If they do not want to give their name, then, and if they're insistent upon that, then we don't push that. If they do not want to do that.
If the complainant doesn't want to give their name?
give their name to DCS.
Okay.
They need to give it to us, but we hold that in confidence unless they allow us to make that contact.
I thought the statute required them to start with the DCS office, though.
Well, yes, it does. And
Okay.
so, but if they, for some reason, feel like they can't do that, we will take the complaint.
Yeah.
It's rare.
Well, that's what I'm getting at. I wonder if the process needs to be revisited, if maybe there's a chilling effect, for folks who may have a real issue or real concern and are afraid of how that would be perceived, or whether it might make things worse if they are in fact already having a problem with the local. I mean, I would assume that folks who are going to the ombudsman are going to the ombudsman because they have a problem with their local DCS office. So we're telling them, go to the local DCS office to resolve the problem, which I understand the concept. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on whether that ever has a chilling effect on folks accessing the ombudsman's office because they're afraid of making a bad situation worse.
I definitely understand what you're saying. We have so few people who call that do not want to give their name. And one thing that helps, I think, is we are not connecting them with their case manager or their case manager supervisor.
Mhm.
And once we explain that we are speaking to a local office director, who typically they don't know at all, or the regional manager. I have had people say, I don't want to speak with the local office director because I won't get anywhere. And so at that point, we connect them with the regional manager. We've even connected people to one of the deputy directors for the field operations. When we've been here about that. But again, I can't speak to people who don't call in because of that. There may be people who don't call us.
One of the public defenders working in the field, but one of the again is that there's no decision making that they can independently at the LD or the supervisor. And they all that's the end of no decision. The complaint. And that the LD their own decision. So person with the complaint, that's a kind of inside. But they show you.
Yeah, I wonder if there may be a chilling effect there. And then I also wonder, from a process standpoint, you said that you're only able to consider what is in the file. So by nature, that would be things that have been documented by DCS, right? So the complainant's issues may or may not have been documented by DCS. So are you saying that, if they file a complaint and spell out their issue, that you're not considering their comments and concerns unless they've been documented in the DCS file?
No, not entirely. The issue we get into is if there was a discussion and someone says they said this, and we go to the department and they say, no, that's not what happened. This is what was said. And we have no other evidence. Many times people do have evidence. I called the case manager on this day, those kinds of things would definitely.
Okay. So if they have their own documentation, if they have emails or text messages or contemporaneous notes or whatever. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
And can I say something? So there are times, I don't know how often it happens, We have complaints come directly to us at central office. We have someone that handles constituent complaints or concerns, and they get them to the right person. But there are times that we would also loop in the DCS ombudsman
Mhm.
to say, you may want to look at this. So just so you know, it's we try to get people connected to the right person to help them as well, because they can just come straight to me, which is fine. But then we also have a system in place within the organization to make sure that those don't just die on a vine somewhere.
I just had a call with the gentleman this morning, exactly like that, where he had called the governor's office, got referred, and called your office,
Mhm.
got referred to, I'm not sure if she, what you call Angel Owens. I assume
Yeah.
is the person you're talking about.
Yeah.
So I explained to him, if he was not able to feel satisfied with that conversation, explain what our role would be. So I know that it does sometimes go through a few steps
Mhm.
with folks.
Do you think there's enough public awareness of the Office of the Ombudsman?
No, absolutely not. And that's one of the things that's in the statute is that we provide education. And I was able to do 3 virtual trainings for, actually I had providers, agencies that called during the pandemic. So I did 3 of those, but that's not nearly enough. I recently spoke at the regional managers meeting to pass out brochures and posters that we requested be placed in every DCS office. And we just did that in October. So we definitely need to do more of that as things open up. I had a couple other presentations scheduled at large groups, like a school social work conference that ended up being canceled again and met virtually. So hopefully I can get out more to let people know. Usually when we ask people how they heard about us, it has been through seeing something posted at their DCS office when they were there. So I think that's a good, we need to be sure that those are always up and available. As clear, providers and other place that they get.
Do you have a social media presence?
No. We don't.
Is that
I
something?
recently attended a little conference on that, a virtual one.
Mhm.
And there's so many pros and cons that I have not hit the bullet yet to do it.
Yeah.
So,
What about, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm
Ms.
the school social work specialist for the department. So I'll reach out to you after, but I can definitely, we could set up a training and I could reach out or post some of your stuff on our page.
So educate school social workers about the Office of the Ombudsman.
Because a lot of times, if a family is connected with the social
Mhm.
worker at school, that's their safe place where they can talk to you about those complaints. It'd be important for
Yeah.
school social workers to know that.
it was the school social work association. I think it's a great resource.
Okay, so you two will connect offline. What about CASA?
Just thinking that might be something.
Pull your microphone toward you, please.
Just thinking if that might be something that would be helpful to our network, with some kind of training on what you do and what resources are available. We would love to do that.
Because I think that that's an area where families do connect. And need to have that.
Well, sounds like we have 2 great training opportunities. So thank you both. I Googled Indiana Child Services complaint, and the first result was contact us, Prevent Child Abuse Indiana, and it has the 877 number for the Ombudsman Bureau. And the second result was the IDOA homepage for the Ombudsman Bureau. And the third result was the DCS parent complaint resolution form page. So it looks like if somebody Googles it using relevant terms, hopefully they're going to land in one of those places. But I think these 2 outreach opportunities that we've identified here have a lot of potential. So any other questions from Ms. Everhart? Anybody online with questions for Ms. Everhart? Anybody I can't see? All of you invisible folks out there? I'm looking at the ceiling. I don't, you're not on the ceiling. All right. Well, thank you for the update. Yeah. Let's see, it's about quarter after. I want to make sure we have plenty of time for the Family First Prevention Services presentation. So are we ready for that? Who's doing that? And that's what this is, right?
Yep. And it's
Okay.
on the screen.
Oh, and it's on the screen behind me. So,
I think Will's driving.
okay.
Are you driving? Thanks.
Have the people I've been talking to been on the screen behind me?
No.
Oh, okay. So I would feel pretty stupid if they were and I was staring at the ceiling. So I forget there's a screen behind me. If any, there are extra copies at the spots up here. If anybody in the audience would like a copy, Mr. and Mrs. Hummer, if you want a copy of this, you're welcome to come up and grab one. We have several extra copies. Anybody? No reason to kill all these trees and not use them.
That's right.
So we also have some extra copies of the youth testimony that was read earlier, if anybody wants that. So. Okay. Gotcha.
Good afternoon. My name is Heather Question. I am the Deputy Director for Strategic Solutions and Agency Transformation at the Department of Child Services.
I'm sorry, what's your last name, Heather?
Question, kind of like question, but question.
Question. Got it.
If you've never heard me say that before, you're welcome. You'll never forget it. Okay, so for the past 3.5 years, I've had the pleasure of working on our Family First Prevention Services Act compliance. Part of that includes our prevention plan and our QRTP, being our Qualified Residential Treatment Program plan. Just before we go too far, I'd like to do some introduction on what FFPSA does and what it doesn't do. So it was passed by Congress and signed into law as part of the Bipartisan Budget Act on February 9th in 2018. It reforms federal child welfare financing streams, including Title 4E and 4B of the Social Security Act, in an effort to provide services to families at risk of entering the child welfare system. So it's designed to prevent the entry of children into child welfare. And by supporting some federal reimbursement for mental health services, substance use treatment, and in-home parenting skill-based training. FFPSA does a lot more than just a prevention plan. It's a pretty robust law that really seeks to transform child welfare. It requires states to provide that Title 4E prevention plan. Indiana submitted our plan in March of 2021. And it also, so that's the carrot, if you will, to the funding stream of the stick, if you will, for the Qualified Residential Treatment Program. We submitted that in August of 2021. So we are, and we have received our compliance letter from ACF for our QRTP. We have not had our prevention plan approved yet by the Administration for Children and Families. We resubmitted in August of 2021, and we are awaiting written feedback from that August submission. We have had a conversation with ACF on November 9th, and we are again waiting for that written feedback before we submit our plan again. Something else that FFPSA does is it requires proof of foster care being given to youth who have aged out of foster care. A number of our youth who are foster care alumni are categorically eligible for a number of programs after leaving care. And it's sometimes really difficult for them to have that proof of foster care or to reach back out to the Department of Child Services after care. So now upon leaving care, they have a one-page form that we sign and make sure that they have when they leave foster care that preserves their ability to get those categorical eligibility requirements in the future. It also reauthorizes Chafee. It expands to age 23 for states that have extended eligibility to age 21. Indiana has extended foster care to age 21, and we did expand that use of education training vouchers, as well as Chafee dollars. And that was what Ms. Tribble was here. She helps us with the Older Youth Advisory Board, in addition to Foster Success, also helps us in other ways, making sure that we are working hand in hand with our older youth who are or have aged out of our system. It also recommends national model family foster home licensing standards. And against all of these, you can see where if there were legislative requirements that were required or that we otherwise engaged in, you can see what those references are afterwards in that orange color. FFPSA also creates new background check requirements, and you can see that that was done in 2019. That was one of the things that we asked for an extension of FFPSA compliance for. So what's on our Title IV prevention plan? So services listed as of December 2nd. And how I spoke earlier about that mental health bucket, the substance use bucket, and the in-home parent skill base. These are the evidence-based programs that are currently on the Title IV Prevention Services Clearinghouse that we also have in Indiana that we have included as part of our prevention plan. So that is functional family therapy. That's been rated as well supported by the Title IV Clearinghouse. Trauma-focused CBT, that's been rated as promising. For substance use, we have added motivational interviewing. That is well supported. And in-home parent skill base, we have Healthy Families America, which is available in all 92 counties in the state of Indiana and is well supported by the clearinghouse. And then Parents as Teachers, which is also well supported. Like I said earlier, we have submitted, our first submission date was actually March 31st of 2021. And we are currently negotiating with ACF and it is pending approval. What questions do you have, if any?
No questions?
Fantastic. Well, thank you for your time today.
Good afternoon. So I'm David Reed, Deputy Director of Services for the Department of Child Services. I'm going to kind of go a little further with the work that we're doing to implement the Family First Provision Services Act, as well as tell you a little bit about a new initiative that we launched back in the summer of 2020, so June 1st, 2020, called Indiana Family Preservation Services. These services are designed to do what they sound like: preserve families, to prevent more from having to enter the foster care system. We've learned a lot from the folks who presented before me. And one of the things we heard about was how traumatic it is for kids and families when they have to separate and enter foster care. And we recognize this is a critical area for us to focus our energies. So we developed this new service through a very lengthy process in collaboration with providers all across the state, with again that goal being finding ways to keep more families together. We really intended these services to be driven by providers, the experts out there who spend the most time with our families, and they should be the ones helping decide exactly what interventions they use. And the service that we've developed allows them to have that kind of discretion to deliver the right service to the right child at the right time, to the right family as well. I mean, these are family-based services. This is a bridge for us to implement Family First, and that we are also requiring the use of evidence-based models. So you heard Heather talk about how Family First, for the very first time, allowed states to use Title IV funding to deliver evidence-based services to families to prevent removal. We developed this service requiring providers to also deliver evidence-based services to families. And we are evaluating the service with the goal that if we can demonstrate it's effective in achieving that mission of keeping families together and doing it safely, we can get some more federal support to deliver the model across the state. So there's potential real large fiscal benefits for the state riding on that evaluation. So what the service is it's a shift in how we reimburse providers, going away from fee for service and going towards per diem. So it's a per diem reimbursed model that again requires providers to deliver evidence-based interventions as well as provide concrete supports to families. When not doing so would result in us having to remove the child. We don't want to remove kids from families for things we could simply write a check for to address. And the providers that are delivering this service are required, they can't find another resource to get the heat turned back on in the house in February or get the rent caught up before an eviction. They can't find another resource. The provider uses their per diem based reimbursement to fund that concrete need for that family. So we're not removing kids because it's cold outside. We recognize just how dramatic that is for kids and for families alike. It doesn't really predict better outcomes for adults or kids. And again, the providers delivering this particular service are the ones who decide, based on their own clinical expertise and judgment and education experience, what evidence-based model makes the most sense for that family. And then we measure their outcomes to make sure we're using the best providers across the state. So again, I mentioned we launched this service back June 1st, 2020. So pretty soon after the pandemic hit, and these are home-based, face-to-face services. But we recognize that these services are critical to be delivered inside families' homes to ensure safety, because they're really kind of the key components of the model are evidence-based interventions, concrete supports, the building in of protective factors for families, and the assurance of child safety. So those are the four key components. And you can't really assure child safety through screens. You need to go into homes to be able to make sure that home is safe. And the provider delivering this service are required to go to these homes at least weekly and see every child and every caregiver face to face. So we launched back June 1st, 2020, in every in-home case. So for the occurrence of the room death or in-home chins cases, informal adjustment cases, gets referred to this service. It's not a cookie cutter because again, the providers decide the intervention strategy based on the family's presentation, but they're the ones driving the intervention strategies. With that launch for all those case types happening on June 1st, 2020, we've now served over 5,500 families. 11,500 kids have received the service so far. Of that group, of that 11,500 cases, only 5.5% of the kids have had at least 90 days of this service. That's a key kind of bar for us to consider, because providers don't have enough time for their services to work until they've had a little time getting them feeding. So after 90 days, we measure provider outcomes. And of the 11,500 kids, only 5.5% of those that have had 3 months of service have had another incident of maltreatment that was substantiated, 5.5%. These again are our highest risk cases. Only 6.6% of those kids have experienced overwhelming, which is really encouraging outcome data at this point for the service. And we monitor this, I check it every day. We have all kinds of provider level data, as well as data around how we're tracking diverse families as well across the state. I mentioned we have a formal evaluations ongoing, so back there on the slide. You're welcome to read that evaluation. And again, we're able to demonstrate through this evaluation that the program is effective in achieving our goal, which lines up with Family First as well, which is keeping more families together and doing it safely. We'll be able to have additional federal supports to deliver the service across the state. We have a web page for it as well. So behind the PS page, at the very bottom of that last slide, just read all about what we've been doing since the program launched June 1st. So
While you're still on slide 7, so I think back, yeah, there we are. Is the 6.6% is 6.6% of the 5,500 families?
So actually, great question. And that's kids. We track families and kids.
So 6.6% of 11,500.
Actually, 6.6% of about 7,800 kids who've gone over 90 days. In some cases, they're newer, so they haven't gotten to 90 days yet.
Okay, so it's the same as the previous bullet where you were tracking the percentage of children who have had at least 90 days of service and have experienced another substantial incident of maltreatment. this is 6.6% of children who have had at least 90 days of service.
Correct.
And you said that's about 7,800?
Yes.
Okay. So the 5.5% and the 6.6% are of the same population,
Correct.
the 7,800. So obviously, I would assume that all of the 5.5% result in removal, right?
No,
No.
great question.
Okay.
So keep in mind, these are cases that already have an allegation called, we substantiate,
Mhm.
and we chose not to remove. And it's possible that could happen again, depending on what the allegation was, depending on what was happening with that family. We could again decide not to remove if there was another allegation called in, but we do want to keep kids safe. And so we're tracking repeat non-frequency.
So, excuse me. So in 5.5% of those 7,800 cases where they've received at least 90 days of this service, there has been another substantiated incident of maltreatment, but in some subset of those, the decision was made to leave the child in the home. Okay. And do you then have data on how many of those cases result in yet another case of substantial mistreatment?
So we track these cases for a year.
Right.
Case closure. And we attribute provider level outcomes to a year post case closure. We want to have sustained. Yes, we will track from the moment the case opens, repeat non-treatment.
Right. What I'm getting at is, so of the 5.5%, some percentage of those are left in the home. Do you have any idea off the top of your head of what percentage of those who are left in the home then suffer another case of maltreatment?
Off the top of my head, no.
Okay.
I can try to dig into that. And see if I'm sure we can get our hands on that piece of information. We're able to do a lot of tracking for these families and finding families that have had more than one repeat maltreatment incident after launching this service. The
Mhm.
question that you're asking, and we can figure out exactly what that percentage is.
Okay. And then what would other reasons for removal be in the 6.6%?
Love that question a lot. So in the past, I think it was referenced earlier, the challenge for us to get
Mhm.
services in place for families, we paid by the hour.
Mhm.
And the family wasn't home and there's no reimbursement for providers, keep going to that home. Now we have a kid in a home where we know there's been abuse and neglect in the past, and no one's going anymore. It's pretty hard for the court to feel comfortable leaving that child in that home when there aren't services that are in place. So in the past, we did a lot more kind of removing because services weren't even available because there was no connection between the service provider and the family. Paying by the hour, that's consequence of that. But paying by the day, providers could keep going, knock on the door, keep trying to engage that family, and eventually do engage.
Mhm.
So I think the reason why we're seeing much closer
Mhm.
between repeat maltreatment and removals is the reimbursement structure that we brought into this way of serving families. Providers can still go and try to connect. They don't remove, because sometimes families are there in crisis. When we are involved, there's a lot going on. You heard from the Hummers talking about all that they had to try and do.
Mhm.
So there's a lot to keep track of. And if they aren't home, they could literally be someplace else. We told them to go.
Mhm.
But the provider is there saying, I can't get any reimbursement if the family's not home today. I keep going to that house and work. Keep my door open if I do.
Right. You mentioned, I think an example you mentioned was the heat being off in February, and that would not necessarily result in removal. It would be a determination by the case manager.
Yeah, so it's one of the key components of this service. We know from child care research just how traumatic it is for kids to enter foster care. We also know February it's really cold. Kids can't stay at home for the heat's not turned on.
Right.
But writing a check to the gas company would prevent that child from entering foster care, spare that trauma. We don't want providers to write checks to gas companies. That's not our mission. Our mission is to teach families about resources. And so providers who do the best at connecting them to the trustee's office, the faith community was referenced earlier, applying for TANF, that's a complicated process, they reference that as well. Providers were good at getting families through that process, write fewer checks to gas companies. And everybody wins because the family wins and keep that in place long after we close. That's a real key component of the model, is to ensure that we have successful, sustained, not families coming back into our system. They've learned about those resources.
Well, I think the Hummer's experience highlighted another area of removal, which is substance use, right? And the lack of services, treatment services for substance use. But I know that has been a controversial area in child services, you know, whether children should be removed in the case of substance use in the home. But that's another determination that's being made on a case-by-case basis.
And certainly DCS needs to partner with other state agencies to help make sure we have things that families need available to them without us having to be involved. I will say there's good research that says the faster we engage families and services, the better they engage. And waiting 6 months for appointment, that's too long.
Right.
With this service, providers have the ability to get into the home quicker because that's when first starts. And so they're there within 3 days.
Yeah.
Over half the time.
Well, I think in the case of substance use, waiting 6 days for an appointment is too long. 6 months is unconscionable. Yeah.
We need to get there as quickly as possible with the right intervention, the right support.
Right.
When we haven't removed, we shouldn't be in conflict. We should be trying to find ways to support that family to prevent removal in the first place.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the explanation on the numbers. I'm sorry for sidetracking you, but if anybody online wants to jump in with any other questions on this slide, feel free. Otherwise, Mr. Reed, please move on. Thank you.
So there are other really kind of 2 key components to family first, the care system. The ability to use federal funds to deliver services is the carrot. The stick part is making sure that states are not using institutional treatment in inappropriate ways. We don't want to be institutionalizing kids. And so to ensure that that's not happening across the country, again, it's not just it's the federal law, this impacts all states all across the country. Family First put in a lot of requirements about when and how and what these programs need to look like for kids who do need that level of intervention, kids who need to go into some kind of institutional congregate care setting. The programs themselves have additional requirements that weren't in place before. In the past, they used to put kids in a licensed program using federal funds with not a whole lot of oversight. Family First builds in the oversight and also requires programs to look in specific ways. So they have to have a trauma-informed treatment model that is designed to address the needs, the clinical needs as appropriate of the children who have serious emotional or behavioral disorders or disturbances. They have to implement those treatment modalities there on their campuses. They have to have qualified staff. And that includes registered and licensed nursing available 24/7, as well as licensed clinical staff who can provide interventions who are on site, consistent with the treatment model, available 24/7. They don't have to be on site 24/7 for the nursing, especially, or even for the clinicians, but they have to have access to those resources 24/7 every day. They have to also facilitate family participation in child treatment. It's also research-based. Provide that's in the child testing, which it normally is to engage families, some families, treatment they're receiving while they're in QRT programs. In addition, they have to facilitate and document that family outreach, maintain contact, especially with siblings. A lot of times their kids go in these programs, they are separated from their siblings while they're there. These programs can find ways to ensure that they don't have that severed while they're in these programs, as well as integrating the family into the treatment that they are receiving while they're in the programs. They have to also provide discharge planning and aftercare. So after discharge, that is family-based. So Family First really is about what it sounds like. It's about families. It's about making sure that kids are being raised in family settings, not by states, not by facilities. In addition, the programs themselves have to be nationally accredited. So by places like CARF or J-Code or Council of Accreditation to ensure they're the highest quality programs. And that's a heavy lift for a lot of states. And yeah, we're 30+ our providers. Many of them are already accredited. And to ensure, again, that only kids who need this level of intervention are in those programs, we have to have somebody objective. So not the state and not the program deciding, does that child need that intervention or not? And simply a lack of a foster care home for a child is not a reason for them to go into. Has to have a clinical need to be there. The law requires it. And there are different ways to meet the letter of the law when it comes to that third-party objective assessment. What Indiana has done is enter into a contract with Maximus to perform those objective assessments utilizing an evidence-based tool. So it has to use an evidence-based tool, they have to be qualified to administer that tool in objective. And then they let us know if the child needs that level of intervention or not. If they do not need to be in those programs, there's no federal support for the state. I mean, it's more complicated than that, but that's the long and short of it. So if states want to use federal resources to put kids in these programs, they need to be in those programs. If they don't, there's no federal support. In addition to Maximus doing that assessment, which must be done within 30 days of their admission. So if the child's admitted today, December 7th, we have to have the assessment done between November 7th and January 7th. Don't count my days there, because it really is 30 days. So some of those months that have 31 days have to be factored in. But regardless, 30 days on either side of the admission, you have to have that assessment done. And then within 60 days, the court must also authorize that child staying in that program. In addition, again, this is based on research, making sure that kids are not institutionalized. They can only be in these programs for a limited amount of time. And from the youth age. So kids 13 and over can be in these settings for 12 consecutive months or 18 non-consecutive months. And kids under age 13, so 12 and under, only 6 consecutive or non-consecutive months. If we want to exceed those time frames, we have to do another assessment to validate the need, and the director of the department has to sign off on staying in the program beyond those time frames. And then lastly, we're still wrestling with this, as are a number of other states. Despite all of that oversight that has been brought in to how we use these programs that was brought on by Family First, it has intersected with a 1965 law and Social Security Act about Institute for Mental Disease. And that law specifies that programs that are treatment-oriented, facility-based programs that have more than 16 beds cannot access Medicaid for any of the care that the resident receives while they're in those programs. And I mean any of the care, so dental, medical, prescription. Medicaid cannot be utilized for kids who are in those IND settings. And a high percentage of our QRTP beds are in INDs. So we have access to Title IV refunds. If we met all those other requirements, we would not be able to use Medicaid to help support the services that those kids receive. There's a lot more to this. If you have more time to tell you more about it, that's an issue that states are wrestling with, because many states are like Indiana, that they've created these programs, but in doing so, have run up against the IND exclusion. I believe that's my last bullet. Happy to take any questions that.
On slide 10, you have lack of foster home is not an acceptable reason. Where are we with foster home capacity, and to what extent is that creating pressure in the system?
We can always use more foster homes. Be very, very clear about that. We're in a better place than we were in 2017. There's no debating that either. The number of kids in out-of-home care in Indiana have been going down, thankfully. Thanks to a lot of our interventions, thanks to a lot of our work, our intentional work of keeping more families together and getting kids out of foster care through adoption, through education. And we're making a lot of progress. There are new challenges that frankly weren't in place in 2017, but they are in 2021. So thank goodness we have fewer kids, because if we still had as many kids now as we have then, with these challenges, workforce issues and finding resources,
Right.
it'd be a complete challenge. It's already hard enough, but we've made a lot of progress. Foster care homes, we still need them. We need ones that can take more challenging youth, because these kids really, this is important that we make sure we follow the use of these programs as the law requires. It's gonna really incentivize states to find family-based placements for kids including kids that are difficult to parent.
Well, that's where I was going. It seems like there's an even more powerful incentive now under this Family First implementation to make sure we have adequate foster home capacity, because there are still children who are receiving residential placement because there's not a foster home available, right?
So we track our assessments that Maximus has been completing, and about 90% of those that they've completed say yes, the youth needs QRTP. That leaves about less than 10%, because of the small percentage that they recommend diagnostic evaluation placement.
Mhm.
But less than 10% of the ones they've assessed so far, they have deemed could be maintained in family-based settings. So I feel pretty good about that. If there's one kid who probably shouldn't be, and we need to respond to that, to developing foster homes that can meet all of the diversity of our children who've experienced trauma. Because of that, are a challenge to parent. That is an ongoing goal before, after, and during giving first.
Right. But if I'm understanding the Family First implementation correctly, based on that evaluation, if a child is in an improper placement, if the evaluation says that they should be in a foster home, not in a residential treatment facility, then that affects our compliance with Family First, right?
It will cause us not to be able to use federal resources to support them.
Right.
If they're in foster care, we can use Title 40 funds to support the placement. If they are not, and they shouldn't be in one of those programs, there is no access to Title 40 for those kids.
Right. So again, that's why I'm saying there's an even more powerful incentive to make sure we have adequate foster home capacity.
It is a key focus of the department at this point. The work that I'm doing with our providers across the state, trying to find ways to equip our foster parents to be able to successfully parent. I mean, it's one thing to say yes and next week say, come get it. No, we want them to be able to maintain the kid and do it safely, so kids have stability in which to heal, and then hopefully they can be reunified.
Yeah. To what extent is it a regional issue? Are there parts of the state where we have closer to adequate capacity and other places where it is severely lacking?
So I think, like most of our resources, I mean, there are parts of the state, rural in nature, that's harder for us to find all of our services. Can I say specifically about access to foster homes? I would have to defer to one of the coworkers who manages our foster homes across the state. But I'm confident somebody will be able to point pockets where but again, statewide, especially high quality, dedicated foster parents who really want to help us achieve the goals of kids, which is permanency. And that includes reunification that was talked about earlier.
Right. Do you have the resources you need, including resources from the legislature, to maintain adequate foster home capacity?
Quite a question. I will need to get back with you on some suggestions that we might have related to that. But again, I mean, having foster care available across the state, I mean, every state would like to grow the foster care capacity in the exception, but we need to have it.
Sure.
We'd rather not have it first place, so we need to have it, but we do, having homes that are trained and supported.
Right.
And competent.
Right. Well, I mean, we should do it under any circumstances, but with the reality of the Family First implementation and the federal funding consequences, it's even more urgent for that reason alone, right?
For funding, but also for child well-being. Kids who raise them.
Right. Well, that's why I said we should be doing it just because we should be doing it. But now there is, under this
More
program, it makes it more urgent from a funding standpoint, right? Yeah. So, I mean, all kidding aside, I hope you'll follow up with me on whatever. Yeah. Well, we need to have those conversations. So, I mean, that's why we're here. So if I don't want to put you on the spot right now, but I would love to have that conversation sooner rather than later, because I want to make sure that you have the resources you need. I mean, we're talking about children, and as we've touched on several times when we talk about percentages, if it's, only 5.5% or it's only 10%, then, another way to look at it is it is 5.5% or it is 10%. So even though, I recognize and commend the success, I think we're all concerned about getting to 100%, as you said, it's unacceptable for even one child to be in an inappropriate placement or to be obviously unsafe or endangered in any way or at a disadvantage. So yeah, let's have those conversations. Other comments, questions from the committee?
I
Director?
have, I always
Please.
have a comment. I think one thing that we can do a little differently is just looking at the language. So residential treatment facilities are for treatment and they've been seen as placement for a long time. And so a kid goes there and they live
Mhm.
there. And to get away from that as a nation, but specifically in Indiana, we've been changing the way we talk about that this is a place to receive treatment,
Mhm.
not for them to live and for us to move on and start working on what's going on with other children. I would love to eliminate the need for these types of treatment facilities because we've been addressing things earlier on. And then the folks that are running these treatment facilities can be looking at other ways to support in the community. But right now we have children that have experienced such severe trauma that they are in these facilities for a multitude of reasons. So if we can focus on seeing this as treatment and not placement, I think that is a good start. And really helping children be in family settings whenever possible, because like David said, the research shows they do a lot. Children do better if they're with families.
And I think the key there is probably the key to avoiding the need for more complex and sustained treatment is earlier identification and intervention. Right?
Absolutely.
Removing fewer kids.
Right.
To give them high quality substitute care, kinship care, foster care, to meet their needs and that one place. Then hopefully they go home.
Right.
Yeah.
If we do more of that, we'll have fewer kids who need that QRTP level.
Right.
We're making progress.
Yeah, as long as we're tracking the children and the outcomes and following the actual children rather than just the numbers. I know this isn't directed to you, Mr. Reed. It's just, it feels good to, get kids out of residential placement, right? But we have to make sure that where they're going is the right place. Yeah.
And with the right supports.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Mr. Moore.
Yeah. So in the scenario, no, because what we've done is working. We don't want to disrupt what's happened. That got that family where they're back and unified. We wouldn't bring in something brand new scenario. Now, if we meet a family and parts of the child group, the sibling group stays, and maybe one or two have to move forward, we can bring in family preservation services. That would be appropriate to work with the family, the kids that are still in the home, and hopefully preparing for the children to return as well.
With the job, the some of your patterns, the one job, I agree that for the core of the child, the first one, to those kind of qualify.
So anytime as you're kind of those scenarios, we need to get you clearance. But the bottom line is it depends on that circumstance, right? How long were they in out of home care? Why they put this back? Are they coming back because services were in place that are going to go away now? Then no, we're probably not going to want to make that change. But if they were locked there for a weekend and they turn back on Monday, it makes perfect sense for the right. So that's basically a new case at that point.
I'm saying is that when I heard it, it's a fire pieces for those that were realized their children college.
That scenario is a very appropriate one for bringing in family preservation. And we do it all the time. So if you're having issues with that being ordered or preferred, reach out to myself and my team will help kind of navigate that.
There's no.
No.
That's the question.
No, so the language in the service standard says formally and indefinitely removed. If we've done that, we're not doing information. But if it's short term time limited, that's pretty short term. We would introduce the information person.
Our scenarios, we really guys always there's like 20 to 36 that's kind of scenario. People will come. Is it very obvious? Sure. Now, This is bad. This is, drug use in a hotel. Difficult, I was trying to. Preservation. And it sort of. Very
Looped in my team on that, and I can ask more questions about like what was happening during the 30 days. Was there something in place that was really effective that's making us now say we could reunify that family? I don't want whatever that is to stop. And with family preservation, it's one provider doing comprehensive services. So something has to end when you bring it in. And what we are going to have to end is working. I don't want to end it. I mean, we can do workarounds for that too. We're able to actually use our thought processes and make real-time decisions for families for what makes the most sense. But I always ask that question, what ends did I bring this in? If that thing that ends is working, maybe they don't bring this in. But it's, yeah, place yet. Those scenarios, if we haven't got things in place that got us to that thought process, bring it into preservation for sure. It would be perfect.
Other questions or comments?
This is Sean McCrindle. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. First comment, David, Heather, the pace at which you and the rest of the DCS team had to work on this stuff is pretty amazing. What is even more amazing is the level you guys ensured, including the providers in the discussion. In discussions with peers of mine throughout the nation, that has not been their experience in their states because this had to roll out quickly. Many of the places just kind of dictated what was going to happen. So first, I'd like to really commend both of you and the rest of the team on doing not what was easy, but what was right and trying to bring everybody to the table. The second thing, the IMD exclusion is something that I think, as this is coming down, we really need to pay attention to and be pushing wherever we can be. Excuse me. I often try to say, okay, what would I want somebody to do with my kid as I think about these things? And the idea that because these kids are living in a treatment center, that now they would lose their insurance, their federal insurance is insane to me, to be honest. And then the second part of that is that cost being passed on to the state is a big concern. I think it's something we need to pay attention to because I think it's probably going to be really hard to know exactly what those costs are going to look like. And that's going to hit the DCS door. So I know as you guys have really been working on this quite a bit, and I know there's some delays in it. Do you see the issue of IMD being able to be resolved before the kids fully lose their Medicaid, or do you see that not being resolved?
So I can try to respond to that, Sean. There are a couple of possibilities that are out there for states to consider, including an exception to our existing 1115 waiver. Indiana is fortunate that we have an existing 1115 waiver. But what that waiver allows states to do that have it is to have patients, kids and adults actually, in INDs and have them be able to retain their Medicaid. But the traditional use of that waiver is an average of 30 days and a maximum of 60 days. So there's not a lot of DCS benefit because most of our kids are in these programs for months. And so the waiver as it's currently constructed isn't really an answer to the IMD issue for Indiana. But because there's been enough states concerned about this, states are able to apply for an exception to their waiver, a 2-year exception that would allow foster youth to continue to have access to their Medicaid for 2 years, while states work on not utilizing QRTP programs that are IMDs. So that's a requirement of the application for that exception. So states have to think about all that goes along with that. But that is one of the options that's on the table. The other option that Sean talked about is just states can choose to pay for the care for those kids, knowing that Medicaid won't be a resource that can be utilized. And that, I mean, the way it's currently looking, years from when we get that waiver, if we apply for it, 2 years after we get that award, then we'll be where we are, because IMDs won't have any ability to use Medicaid for any of the. So it is a critical issue for the state to consider.
Is that something that Congress is looking at?
It is. There's been some proposed legislation. I don't know, I think the last I heard, it's in committee.
And CMS has been involved in as well.
It's one of the frustrating things about the first, there wasn't clear guidance about the intersection of QRTPs and IMDs until literally October of 2021. Family First passed in February 2018. Had they been more clear with states, the states were asking, had they been more clear with states about, no, IMD is going to apply to QRTPs, even though they have all these other requirements. No, but they have more than 16 beds. It's quite possible they're going to be deemed an IMD, and therefore your access to Medicaid will be restricted. But they weren't clear about that until literally just a month before this. And so that puts states in a difficult position, our state included.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. McCrindle. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Well, Mr. Reed, thank you. And Ms. Keston, thank you as well. I appreciate your presentation. Looks like we have a few follow-up items as usual. Public comment. I don't think we had anyone sign in. Committee discussion. Anything else we'd like to discuss? Okay. I believe there is a meeting of the Children's Commission coming up on the 15th. Ms. Whitman, what time is that? 10 a.m. to noon on December 15th. The Children's Commission will meet in Government Center South, Conference Room B as in boy. Okay, very good. And that's also broadcast on the internet. Okay. And thanks to Ms. Whitman, as I've mentioned before, none of this would happen without her support or the support of my legislative assistant, Mr. Lopret, and the team from FSSA, which has live streamed this. And I don't see any of them, but I know they are present. But thanks to all of you for making these meetings possible. And thanks to the committee, both those who are here in person and those who have been able to join us virtually, and to all of the advocates and other stakeholders. And of course, today, the Hummers, thank you again for being with us. And just all the members of the public who are out there. I don't know how many folks have been watching online, but we have some, and look forward to hearing from members of the public who have things they would like to share. So with that, it is 2:04, and I will wish everyone happy holidays, and we stand adjourned.